Now, the US and UK have carried out new joint strikes on Houthi targets in Yemen, including on the capital, Sana'a. The Pentagon says they hit 8 locations, an underground storage site, as well as locations associated with the group's missile and air surveillance capabilities. It's the second time the two allies have coordinated to attack Houthi targets in Yemen. The Houthis had previously vowed to continue their attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. British Foreign Minister David Cameron gave a statement on what prompted this latest round of airstrikes. Have a listen.
Since we last took action 10 days ago, there have been over 12 attacks on shipping by the Houthis in the Red Sea. These attacks are illegal, they're unacceptable. And what we've done, again, is send the clearest possible message that we will continue to degrade their ability to carry out these attacks, whilst sending the clearest possible message that we back our words and our warnings with action.
And I'm pleased to welcome Sarah Bazu-Bandi from the Giga Institute of Middle East Studies in Hamburg. Welcome. Considering that we've seen these past strikes and they don't seem to have deterred the Houthis, do you think that these most recent strikes by the US and the UK can make a difference in deterring the Houthis?
Thank you for having me. Good morning. Unfortunately, no. The short answer is no, because when looking at the Houthis and their actions in that region, one needs to really reflect on the ideological framework that they're working within and their political project. The ideological framework is that they are exactly like every other Islamist radicalized movement that we've seen in that part of the world and globally, in fact. They are after establishment of a worldwide Islamic caliphate with its capital being based in Jerusalem. So they have multiple goals to achieve. Most importantly is to destroy the state of Israel. And they believe that the path to achieve that ultimate holy goal is a long-lasting war, and they are prepared, and they have shown that resilience and preparedness before, that they are not going to step down from their ambitions. Their political project is also to establish a Zaydi, Shia, ideologically structured political establishment like they had for hundreds of years in north of Yemen until 1960s, when eventually they were dismantled. So this temporarily might contain the attacks, but in the long run, we're dealing with a very dangerous ideology, and it's very hard to contain it.
And we should say that Iran also plays an important geopolitical role here. What kind of reaction do you think that we might see from Tehran? Is a widening of the conflict in its interest at the moment?
Yes, Iran has been investing for a very long time in Houthis and trying to align them and their ambitions with its own strategic ambitions and with its own, in fact, ideological ambitions. Because let's not forget that one of the reasons that brought these two together is their ideology and their world vision, and the way that they perceive the changes in the global framework needs to be done in order to have a ultimate utopian global system that they have in mind. Iran is an important supporter for Houthis. There have been various pieces of evidence, leaked evidence, that indicates that Islamic Republic Revolutionary Guards have been training the Houthi forces. They have bases to support and to consult with the Houthi forces inside Yemen. They have been delivering arms and ammunition to them. So Iran is not going to also back down from its support for the Houthis. In fact, this conflict is a God-given gift to the Iranian regime, because there is a lot of problems at home. There is a lot of pressure, specifically domestically, economically, socially. Iran is going through a very dangerous pension and banking crisis. Both systems are on the verge of collapse and bankruptcy, and maintaining the public sentiment in this state of anxiety, whether Iran is going to enter into a war, whether or not, what's going to happen. It's a very good way for for the regime to control the society as well.
Yeah, those domestic considerations, of course, very important too. Sarah, thank you. And please stay with us. I want to turn our focus a little more to Iran's role in the conflict. As we know, following Hamas's October 7th terror attacks and Israel's subsequent invasion of Gaza, violence has spread throughout the region, from Israel's border with Lebanon to Iraq, Syria and the Red Sea. Iran really has been at the center of it. We know Tehran has been using its network of proxies to chip away at Israel and its main ally, the United States. Let's see if we can take a closer look.
Israeli troops on the advance. Footage from Israel's military shows its forces fighting in the Gaza Strip. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly framed this as a struggle between Israel and Iran, which backs Hamas. Israel has long been locked in a shadow war with Tehran, conducting covert strikes and targeted killings. It was believed to have been behind this strike in Damascus at the weekend. But Netanyahu says his country is now in direct conflict with Iran.
Who says we're not attacking Iran? We are attacking it. Iran is the head of the octopus and you can see its tentacles all around.
Iran backs a network of militant groups throughout the Middle East, among their goals to undermine Israel and drive out American influence. These proxies have become more active following the October 7th terror attacks. In Lebanon, Tehran supports and arms Hezbollah, seen by some countries as a terrorist organisation. Its fighters fire rockets into Israel on an almost daily basis. Israel is returning fire. These images released by the Israeli army. But while the situation here at the border is tense, so far each side has been careful to avoid an escalation. Iran also arms the Houthis, an armed group in Yemen's civil war which has seized control of large parts of the country, including the capital Sana'a. Now the Houthis are attacking commercial ships in the Red Sea. They released this video showing them boarding and seizing a cargo vessel. They say they are acting in solidarity with the Palestinians.
Yemen is bravely standing against Israel. Thank God for your beautiful efforts. Brave, mighty and proud Yemen is defending the oppressed and strong Palestinian people.
The United States and others have sent warships to the region and launched strikes on Houthi targets. Another front is in Iraq and Syria, where Iran appears to be encouraging its militias to attack US military bases. Washington has responded with its own strikes. Israel's president is calling for a global response to these challenges.
There is an empire of evil emanating from Tehran. They have proxies all over the region, quietly lurking to undermine any peace process and any stability of the world. And that is exactly what we are seeing, and they have to be faced by a very strong coalition.
For the moment, Gaza is the most active front in Israel's Cold War with Iran. But Tehran's proxies are becoming more heavily involved. Each strike and counterstrike could bring the sides closer to open conflict.
So we have Sarah Bazubandi from the Giga Institute of Middle East Studies still with us. And we just heard in that report there a little bit of context about Iran's proxies, about this so-called axis of resistance. And Sarah, I'd like to get your view. I mean, when we're looking at groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, how much is Iran really calling the shots here?
Iran tends to detach itself, and if you look at the speeches by the supreme leader, by other senior officials inside Iran, they praise their actions, but they don't really take responsibility. They don't share responsibility. But in fact, we know that for decades these groups have been supported by Iran. In 2018, the U.S. Treasury did a calculation and estimate of how much Iran is is injecting, investing financially in only one group, Hezbollah. Nearly $1 billion in that one single year was invested by Iran in Hezbollah, paid by Iran directly to Hezbollah in various forms. So you cannot have a group that you support and invest this amount of money in them without having the right to demand or to influence their decisions. So that is my personal opinion. There is a degree of influence. There is a degree of manipulation and control by Iran in exchange of to the very least, in exchange of financial incentives. And yes, of course, it's very hard to exactly measure how much the extent of this influence is, but there is undoubtedly a very strong influence by Iran over these groups.
And we spoke a little bit earlier about the domestic situation inside Iran. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how what's going on there is affecting Iran's foreign policy, and if there's any chance that frictions within Iran itself could ultimately lead to a world in which we see Tehran seeking to normalize relations with Israel in the way that we have seen many Muslim majority countries seek to do.
Unfortunately, to go to your last question about normalization, I don't have really hope in the current political elite inside Iran to have any desire for normalization. That is against their DNA. This is not, doesn't have any space in their political imagination, in their geostrategic imaginations, in their aspirations. They see themselves more in line with countries like China and Russia and their new world views and their new world order narrative, in which the US power is undermined, multiple other strong powers are rising, and that new world order creates the space for middle powers like Iran to jump in to assert power, to establish themselves and project themselves as a more powerful player at the global level. So this is very much what the current political elite inside Iran really desire to aspire to. The situation inside Iran for the people is extremely dire. The inflation is crushing. As I mentioned earlier, the pension funds crisis, the banking crisis. Iran has 17 pension funds. According to the government's reports, nearly 90% of these funds are bankrupt. So they are only paying their pensioners with the cash injections from the government budget. So for how long the government can last this, really nobody knows. But the fact is that with the current economic situation, they're alienating the people, they're alienating various interest groups within the elite, and the current elite has no desire to align itself with normalizing with the West, unfortunately.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. That is Sarah Bandi from the Giga Institute of Middle East Studies. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Guido Steinberg is a Middle East expert at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs here in Berlin. He joins us now. Good to see you, Guido. What do you think is behind this growing involvement of Iran's proxies? I mean, is this only about the war in Gaza?
No, it's more about Iran itself. Iran's aim is to gain hegemony in the region, and there are two main obstacles in its way. One is Israel, a small country but a nuclear power, and secondly, it's the United States and its military presence, and therefore it uses the opportunity to show that it can hit Israeli and American targets all over the area, in Iraq, in Syria, from South Lebanon, in Gaza, and in Yemen. But it does not want a full-blown conflict right now, I believe, because it thinks it might be too weak at the moment.
OK, so obviously trying to strike the balance. Do you think the Islamic Republic will take further action then? And if yes, what might that look like?
Well, the Islamic Republic already does take further action, and there is always the danger of escalation. For the time being, it mainly relies on the strikes by its proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. But I believe that it already plans attacks on Israeli and possibly Jewish targets abroad, simply because the leadership of the Islamic Republic is under pressure by its own hardliners to react on what has happened in recent weeks and months, especially the direct attacks by Israel on its personnel, leading personnel of the Revolutionary Guards in Syria.
OK, so the benefit then for Iran, if this conflict spreads out further, or even if there is an all-out war across the Middle East, what is that benefit exactly?
Well, Iran, for the time being, does not want this major conflict. It simply wants to show the Israelis, the Saudis, and the Americans that it is able to hit targets all over the Middle East whenever it wants, that it is a major power in the region. It does not want a major escalation simply because its own weaknesses in the country. We have seen that in early January. The major terrorist attack in Kerman on the 4th of that month. It mainly fears a revival of the protest movement in the country, not so much the women in Tehran, but the protests in the border areas in Kurdistan, in Baluchistan, and in Khuzestan, where big minorities live. And that is part of the reason why the Islamic Republic does not want a major escalation right now.
OK, and just clarify for us again, how has Iran's regional policy shifted since the start of the war in Gaza?
Well, it has shifted insofar as it has mobilized virtually all of its proxies, I would say, in the whole region. It has not shifted insofar as from the beginning Iran did not want a major confrontation, but it has ordered its proxies to step up attacks. That was first Hezbollah in Lebanon, which attacked Israel early on in the war from southern Lebanon. It has ordered more than 100 attacks by Shia militias on American targets in Iraq and Syria, and most recently, it has ordered the Houthis to attack maritime traffic in the Red Sea. It's a dangerous policy, but it's not a policy designed to lead a major war against the United States. The leadership in Tehran is well aware that it could lose such a kind of war, and it could lose its power in the country. It is mainly motivated by its desire to stay in power in Tehran.
Guido Steinberg, Middle East expert from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Guido, thanks so much for your insights. And for more on this, we can cross straight to our correspondent in London, Birgit Maas. Birgit, what else do we know about these most recent attacks by the US and the UK?
We have a Pentagon statement, and that says that 8 targets in Yemen were hit with what they call precision strikes. They also say that it's aimed at underground storage and at missile and surveillance capabilities. Now, when it comes to the justification for these strikes, you've already heard UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron. He further fleshed out in a statement that he does not believe the Houthi narrative, that this is all in retaliation to the war in Gaza, and he bemoans that Houthis have indiscriminately targeted shipping. So the narrative overall from the US and the UK and the general coalition that are behind these strikes is this is to protect international shipping, to protect the Red Sea that's so vital for global trade.
This is the second time that the US and UK have conducted these coordinated military strikes against the Houthis. Is there support for these attacks generally in the UK?
It's interesting. A recent poll did show that there was overall support by the British public, and also there is generally cross-party support when it comes to the conflict in the Middle East, and also about these attacks. There is a little bit of disquiet that the opposition leader wasn't briefed before these strikes, but generally there is cross-party support. That doesn't mean that there aren't also critical voices on the left of the Labour Party mainly, but also by some experts in the region. So they say that overall there should be a strategy of de-escalation, as one researcher puts it, with a ceasefire in Gaza at the heart of this de-escalation strategy. And I would say that the overall support for the strikes by the British public doesn't mean that there isn't also an anxiety about the conflict in the Middle East, of course, but also about these strikes. So there is, of course, the risk of that this could generally escalate the conflict, and this is something that I think the British people are aware of.
Birgit, thanks so much for bringing us up to date. That's DW's Birgit Maas in London.